Welcome to Smart Risk for Smart Science, leveraging your broker as a strategic partner. Hi, everybody. I'm Katrina Rogers, and I run Katrina Rogers Consulting, where I work to help others make big ideas real in drugs, devices, diagnostics, and digital health. Today, we have the luxury of hearing from thought leader on insurance, Daniel Tabb with Houchins Insurance Group. And we're going to talk a little bit about smart risk for smart science, which is leveraging your broker as a strategic partner. And let's get started, but let's do a couple of administrative things first. For those of you on the call, if you have any questions, please submit them through the chat or raise your hand. We like to take questions as we go. This will be a pretty informal session. We don't have a large group of folks on the call, so it'll be very flexible. So then let's go ahead and get started. And first, Daniel, I'd like to have you give us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Katrina, and thanks for having me today. Glad to be here. And it's a little bit about me. I've been in the insurance business going on 18 years now, and I've been with Houchins for 11 of those, so the last 11 years. And a few years ago, we decided to start going into some specialty areas, and life science was something I had dabbled in a little bit before, and so we went out and created our own practice group for life sciences. Myself and another agent kind of run that, and since then we've had some really good success in this area. And I just enjoy this industry. It's interesting. It's a little more complex for us, so it keeps it interesting on our side as well, and it keeps us engaged. And so we've had really good success with it, and really enjoy this industry and helping this community, specifically the startup community, kind of wade through some of this stuff that they may not be familiar with. So, but Houchins and Houchins Insurance Group as a whole, we are typically around the top 50 largest agencies in the country. We have over 500 employees now throughout, I believe it's 13 locations now. We just picked up a new one outside the Dallas area. So we're spread out across the country in our offices, and work countrywide, nationwide, throughout those different locations there. So we have multiple practice groups as well, not just life science, but construction, manufacturing, transportation, and a public entity is a big one for us as well. So we're pretty diverse in what we do, but we also specialize in several areas, and it's been a good fit for us. So, but that's a little bit about me. Like I said, we started this a few years ago, and we've really just dove into this industry and really enjoy working with the people in it.
Well, that's great to hear. I love this industry too. I think there's something new to learn every day, and lots of really interesting and fun people to work with.
I think so too.
Daniel, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation was so many founders that I meet either don't think about their service providers at all, except as, kind of a transactional relationships. And they certainly don't think about some of the issues around risk management and how that feeds into governance. And that's really the heart of the conversation that we're having today. You want to tell us a little bit first about how an insurance broker like yourself, if a person builds a strategic partner relationship, how can that add value to a startup business?
Well, there's a couple of ways. And the first one would be, when you're in a startup position, finding a broker that you want to partner with, and they can be with you as you continue to grow through those next steps as your business progresses. So they're going to know you from day one, instead of coming in 5 years later when you've maybe got a product on the market and things like that, and trying to learn your business. That broker's been with you from day one, and is a true partner in your business. Some of the other things, is how the market looks at your account, how the insurance market looks at your account. Finding one strategic broker to work with really gives you an advantage in the marketplace. I know kind of the old way of thinking is, hey, I'm going to go get 3 brokers. We're going to quote this out and send it out, and we're going to get the best rate. Well, those days are kind of over. It just doesn't really fly anymore. And especially in specialized industries like life science, for example, there's only so many carriers out there that are playing in this space. So if you go call 3 brokers, have them all go out, they're all going to the same place. And what happens at that point is that underwriter has a stack of submissions on their desk they've got to get through. And if they have 3 different brokers sending it in, then they're really not sure who's in control at that point. and your account's probably going to get pushed to the side at that point, honestly, because they may have something in front of them. They know, hey, ABC broker here has this account. They're sending it to us. The submission's clean, and we're going to work on this and work on with them to get the best rate for that particular client. Whereas if the water's kind of muddy, they really just they might throw a price out, but it may not be in your best advantage there. And that's really changed in the last few years in our industry. And, so finding that one broker that you trust to do it the right way for you is really important for your pricing, especially as you grow down the road. Because as you get larger and things become more complex, you may need to go to another carrier. The one you started with may not be able to handle you at that point, and that's okay, but you need to make sure your broker understands that the market and where to go with it, and not just kind of throwing it out there. Hey, let's go get the best rate from 3 different brokers. So that has changed a lot. We're hearing it from the carriers as well. They want nice, clean submissions. Top of the stack is what we call them. So, and then also just working with somebody that understands this industry as and can help you with your contracts. When you start working with CROs and things like that, have a broker that can review those contracts, look for gaps in coverage. Our goal is to transfer that risk as much as possible to make sure that you're protected. So I think that's a big one as well. And, as being in this industry the last few years, we know attorneys, we know consultants, we know, different people like you, Katrina, that can help in different areas, so having somebody that can point you in the right direction as well is very important as you grow your business.
No, that's actually excellent. An excellent summary. So if you let me play that back a little bit for you so that I can hit some of the high points. One of the things you're saying is that founders can take advantage of the efficiency of your existing processes and relationships with the underwriters, with the people who are actually writing the insurance contracts, as well as your knowledge of who is a good insurer and maybe who's a weak insurer in the business in order to kind of maximize the value of the coverage that they get. I think the other thing you alluded to was really thinking about this phase appropriate risk assessment and management. Let's talk about that a little bit more. How do you operate your process when you start talking to a new founder?
So typically what we see in the beginning, very early stage, maybe looking at leasing some lab space. Obviously, everybody's looking to raise money. That's number one, really. And then, so typically what you want to start off with is your pretty basic policies, just your basic general liability policy. If you go to rent lab space, that lab company is going to want to see, or university or whoever it is, they're going to see that you have some type of general liability to protect yourself and them. And so those are pretty basic and pretty simple. And most of the policies that we write in this space come with some additional coverages in there as well in that small package. A big one is intellectual property coverage that typically we include in that as well. And that's kind of two-sided. It's if you were to infringe on someone else's IP, or if someone was to infringe on yours, there's coverage there for both sides of that. So you always want to make sure that's in there as well, because you don't want, what you're working on to, if someone tried to use your intellectual property for their product, you want to be able to defend yourself in that particular scenario. So that's really the basics in the beginning. And then kind of next, what we typically see is what I usually get the next call on is directors and officers coverage. Let's say you found someone that wants to give you some money. Maybe they want a seat on the board, or they just want to make sure that the board is protected. They'll typically want to see some directors and officers coverage in place at that point. So that's usually the first two things we start with is your basic general liability package and your directors and officers. And typically for a startup, these are minimal costs. They're not crazy, because there's not your pre-revenue and a lot of this stuff is based off of revenue. The rates are based off revenue and things like that. So I know a lot of people kind of get, oh my gosh, how am I going to afford all this? I can't take all this on, but usually they're pretty cost effective, and we've got some good carriers that we work with that understand the pre-revenue companies. and they're willing to underwrite those for us, and we have a good relationship with them. So not all carriers will take on a pre-revenue company for directors and officers. So because it's a lot of risk for them, right? There's a lot of uncertainty there. So we have some good relationships there that we've built, and you know, directors and officers, like I said, it's all revenue based, and you can have as many board members on there as you want. It's not really based off the board member count. It's more based off the revenue or pre-revenue, I guess you could say, in some of these scenarios. But that's the progression there. And then from there, let's say, your research comes and you're going to go to clinical trial. You're going to start clinical trials. And that is a whole other policy and protection that you need. And there's a lot there, and I'll go into some of this if you want, as far as whether you're doing those in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. There's most of the carriers have a global network where they can provide coverage in all these countries. And what you'll find is a lot of countries have different requirements, whether the carrier needs to be admitted in that country or they don't have to be admitted. A lot of the countries as well don't have as high requirements as the U.S. because, well, we like to sue people in the U.S. And so our limits, typically need to be at least $1 million for U.S. based. Whereas outside, you may see 100,000, 200,000, and those types of things. And those aren't, those are all based on how many people are involved in the trial. That's how those are rated. So, but we can usually get you a pretty good number on those with just, some basic information. The trial protocol is something we always need. The informed consent is something we always want to review as well. And then the investigator's brochure. Those are 3 things we always want to look at when we're looking at clinical trial coverage for you. And so it's not it doesn't fall under your regular coverage. It is a separate coverage that we have to pick up. But it's, they're pretty straightforward, and we can always find the coverage you need for whatever country you're going to.
Okay. And is that a thing where you often have to leverage your networks that are comfortable with pre-revenue companies?
Yes.
Yeah.
And most of the time when you're there at that point, you've raised some money, obviously. So you're a little bit better on paper at that point. But we have multiple avenues for that as well. And so the market will, depend on where you're at, we'll find the market for you based on those. And one thing, what we always do as well there is we always set up what we kind of call a master U.S. policy for clinical trials. So that will kind of cover you if you're sued within the U.S. or even outside the U.S. That will give you the coverage there for both of those. So, but that's, it's a little different than your Main Street type policy. So you got to make sure you're looking at countries and that maybe are not as high risk as others. And depending on what you're doing, your drug or your device, you may have to go to a high risk country. We kind of have a color coded system, red, yellow, green, for countries. And so obviously red is bad.
No, not bad. Just higher risk.
Just higher risk.
Nothing's good or bad. It's all higher or lower
just
risk.
Higher risk. So, and we, as you're looking at those, we can work through that with you and kind of say, hey, these countries are going to be higher risk and cost more as opposed to these in the green or the yellow. They're going to be a little bit better for you. So no, go ahead.
I said, I've got an off the cuff question based on my experience. Does the clinical trial insurance with these policies typically cover the samples, the shipment of the samples and the preservation of the samples?
So that's a little bit different coverage. And that's covered under, there's a couple different ways we can do that. Kind of covered under the inland marine coverage, which is for products like that, or stock coverage is where that's going to come in.
Okay. What's interesting about that, just to sort of tell everybody this little story, I've worked with a lot of folks who, you do a clinical trial and you're not really thinking about the importance of your samples because essentially those are one and done. You don't get a chance to resample them.
Right.
And if they're coming from any distance, they're coming into the United States to your central lab, or they're coming to they're going from one place to another. If they end up sitting on a loading dock because they didn't clear customs and nobody's there to pay attention to the dry ice that they're supposed to stay on,
right,
you could lose all of those
everything.
Samples.
Right,
and it would that ruins your trial entirely.
And that's a great question, but there is coverage for that. It's a little bit different, but and then as you get into some of that too, if it's on, for example, if it's on the truck at the time, let's say, and that truck has an accident, then that's covered under the motor cargo of the trucking company.
Right.
So that's where you need to make sure that they have coverage. If you're working with a carrier, a motor cargo carrier, you need to review their requirements and their insurance, and make sure they're providing you with the documentation that they have that covered when it's in their possession. So there's a lot of little different things that happen during those scenarios when you're shipping, as to who's got the coverage and who's responsible for it during that time. So
Right.
um,
Is that the kind of thing that you do when you have a strategic relationship with a startup company?
so if they say we're going, we've hired, XYZ trucking company to ship our samples or whatever, then we can say, hey, make sure they're providing you with proof of insurance, that they have, motor cargo carry coverage to protect your samples or whatever it might be. Let's say it's even your devices, that are being shipped, that they have the coverage in place when they're in possession of it.
Great.
We review all that.
Perfect. That's exactly what I think that's exactly the kind of relationship I like to have with the people that I think this is really about creating that trust space so that we can rely on each other.
And again, like I said earlier, though, but I was going to say, we want to make sure that, we can transfer that risk. We can, somebody else is responsible during their time in possession or whatever it might be. Then we want to make sure that risk is transferred to them instead of you.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. So getting back to the different kinds or the phase appropriate management, we talked about general liability. We talked about IP insurance, which is not something I'd really thought about, but that's, again, it's a bucket of money it's a bucket of money that you would have if you had some issue, right? I mean, people spend a lot of time and a lot of money creating IP, whether that's patents or trademarks or trade secrets, but they don't think about having a bucket of money to defend it.
Exactly. So, and that, like I said, that goes both ways. So, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you infringed upon our IP, and you need to defend yourself, we're going to do that. But at the same time, if you feel like somebody's infringed on yours, then we can defend you and, go after them as well. So it's kind of two-sided there, but very important, because that's your information, right? That's what you worked for. So you don't want to lose it.
Very, very true. And then we talked about D&O insurance as well as clinical trial insurance. What about insurance when you become an employer of record?
So there's a few things there. So number one, if you have employees, workers' compensation is going to come into play at that point. Usually early on, there may be one or two founders. That's about it. And so you don't really have to put that into play. But as you grow and you start hiring employees, workers' compensation is going to be key. And those are very state specific at that point. So we need to know, where your employees are at. You may have employees in multiple states working remotely and things like that. So we have to collect all that information as well and make sure that we're covering those states and their requirements and their limits and everything there. So, and another big one is employment practices liability, which has become more and more prevalent these days, I should say. So basically, if you wrongful termination, sexual harassment, it falls into that. There's a lot of things that fall underneath employment practices. So if you were to fire someone and they said you wrongfully terminated them and they wanted to sue the company, that's where we're going to defend you at that point. If somebody claims sexual harassment, then we're going to defend you at that point. Even as far as you always want to make sure you have third-party coverage in there as well. So that's kind of like, let's say there's a delivery guy that comes in once a week and he's kind of harassing the front desk clerk, maybe, and this person reports it and then it continues and then they decide to sue you or something like that, then that's where the coverage comes into play.
Right.
So, those are probably your two biggest when you start to take on employees and you're an employer of record. And then if you ever want to look at your employee benefits coverage, if you want to start those plans at that point. I don't personally do that, but we have a division that does. So, if you start to, have a decent number of employees and they want to, you want to put together a plan for them, we can help with that as well.
Good. Good. So again, it's really about your being able to direct people to the right resources, whether that's something that you're managing firsthand or whether that's some other part of the Houchins group.
Yeah. And, and I
Nice.
think a lot of this falls back to communicating with your broker and them communicating with you as well
Mhm.
on a regular basis. And, if we don't know what you're doing, then we we can't put anything into place to protect you, right? And we get those calls a lot, not just in all industries. Oh, hey, we're doing this now. We've been doing it for 6 months. We're like, wait a second, you're not covered for that.
Yeah, we can't back right coverage.
Right, right. We get that a lot, unfortunately. So, but that's but we can provide all those things. And at that point, you want to start looking at your employee handbooks and things like that, which we can help with as well. All of your, different types of policies, hiring policies, things like that, we can help with. We have a full team that helps with them. Any type of loss control stuff like that. We have a huge library of resources we can provide to kind of help you get off the ground with those and give you
Right.
templates and stuff instead of trying to, as a small company, to go out and pay them maybe an HR firm to provide all that for you may cost thousands of dollars, where we can just say, hey, here we've got it. It's free. Take it,
Right.
maybe, consult with an attorney potentially, but we have all those templates and everything in place for them, so they don't have to go out trying to reinvent the wheel.
Right. Right. When you can use a template that's worked for others, that's always
Right.
to my
Yeah.
mind, that's the best strategy. Do not reinvent the wheel.
Right. Don't just make it there. Don't just use like Chat GPT or something to go.
Oh, yeah.
It's out there, it's available, but it's
Well, again, where are you going to find the reference source you need to check Chat GPT?
exactly.
Yeah.
So
So true. I'm sure we're freaking some of these founders out
I
a
hope
little
not.
bit here where we're talking about this. Like, how am I going to figure all this stuff
Yeah.
out? So talk to me about the cadence that you like to talk to people on. Is it, how often do you want to like have a regular scheduled call with people, or as you operate this relationship?
Yeah. So early on, it's we typically like it kind of depends on what the client wants as well. But we can do it every quarter, every 6 months. We typically like to at least do that every quarter, every 6 months. Annually is a must. And within that, or I guess adding to, because we want to work on your annual renewal. We want to be touching base on those probably 120 days out or so, to start making sure that nothing has changed too much, aside from those conversations we've already had throughout the year. So now we like to start that process early. Sometimes the underwriters don't like to start the process that early, so because they have so much on their desk. But if we have everything ready to go when they're ready, then we can process that renewal much faster. And then throughout the year, things change. So that's why we want to have some touch-ins throughout the year and say, hey, has anything changed? Are you looking at, doing any expanding or anything like that, whatever it might be. And we can make sure that we're aware of it and we're ready for it when the time comes, as opposed to, hey, we started this, 2 months ago, and now everybody's scrambling to try to make sure you're protected.
Right.
We try to, we want to touch base at least 2 or 3 times a year just to check in. And it can be more than that if the client prefers that. Most don't. They don't want to hear from us that much. But it's, but with these early stage companies, sometimes things move fast. If things take off, they're going to go fast. So
they're going to go fast. Maybe there's a good way to reframe that too. Many founders have either a quarterly strategy meeting, or if they're at that stage, they might have a quarterly board meeting. Maybe the call with you is a great way to prep for that quarterly meeting.
Yeah, for sure. And we're always happy to do that, so we'll touch as much as you want us to. And I think it's important at least, 2 to 3 times a year, to make sure you're having some communication and to make sure things aren't, getting too far. Things aren't advancing further than we may realize.
Right. So we talked a little bit about sort of the value that you could bring to doing the risk assessment management, also the resources and the templates that a library of things that people can access. What other resources do you accrue, or, how do you manage your network in order to bring more resources to the companies you serve?
So, we have over these last few years, you and I have met, Katrina, and you're a resource for us, And so basically what we do is, what we've done is just, we've joined a networking group with you, the bullpen, and through that we have, we've made a ton of connections of different service providers within this industry. I think that's what you're referring to. How do we
Exactly.
so we we kind of, what I like to say is we like to have a full tool bag of other people that work in this industry, whether it be attorneys, consultants, whatever that might be, accountants, private equity, VC. So we've really focused on building that network up as well, so that when you call and say, man, we're struggling in whatever area it might be,
Right.
we can say, hey, I know Katrina, I know so and so. Give them a call, or let's do an introduction, and let them see if they can help you, facilitate whatever issue you're having at that time. So that's been really big for us, to kind of just be a full tool bag and not just an insurance provider.
Right. And I think that's a powerful place where both you and I sit. I mean, I think that to my mind, it's the huge strength of the Bullpen Club, right? Our mantra:
Oh, yeah.
Find someone to help and repeat. If we come at this from the perspective of, I'm here to help, I'm also here to have a little fun, that makes this a little bit easier to do.
Right.
I think one last thing that I'd like to ask you about. So, and now the question has escaped my mind. So let me see if I can reframe it again. I think this is lonely work. Being a founder is lonely work. Running a company by yourself is very lonely work. Even if you're just doing it with a small group of people, there's a lot of joy in it, but there's also some days where you're like, I just have no, I'm running out of ideas. Yeah. And do you find, I think that's the place where you and I sit very nicely. It's just an opportunity to listen to somebody articulate, what's going on. Just be like, I hear what you're saying. I acknowledge. Let's just acknowledge that this could easily make you really crazy and angry, but what you've got to find a way forward through is, how are we going to operate? How are we going to persevere and persist?
Continue on. You're right. No, I totally agree. And I think that's where, in those conversations, typically is where we pick up on, well, hey, I know such and such. You call, maybe give them a call, just talking, having normal conversations, because things come out of those, whatever issues they're having. I think typically just listening and saying, oh, well, maybe I can help. Maybe we can point you in a direction that might make your life a little bit easier. I know you have a lot going on, maybe this will make things easier, connect with, whoever that might be. But it is, and that's where we want to be the resource on, once they come outside of the lab into the business world, because they're very good at what they do. The founders are great at what they do, but they just don't know what they don't know, what they haven't experienced before, right? And so if we can be a partner with that, then that's I think that's bringing a lot of value to people like you and I. But we're there to, like I said, and the Bullpen Group, I think, really lives that mantra. It really does. It's a lot of groups say they do things, but they may not do, and that's in all aspects of life. But I really think people are really willing to help in this industry as a whole, and just it's good to see, honestly, that people are so willing to help each other.
It is. It is the best part about this club. It's the opportunity to just kind of dig in and address the things and then also to talk to people about what's the same. You're not crazy. This happens to be the only one who's experiencing this. And not only that, but we've seen people get through it. So that's just keep going.
Just keep plugging away. And, and it's tough. It is. It's hard. And I respect these people, tremendously for what they do and the perseverance that they have, because it's not easy. It's not. And of course, everything takes money. So that's the hardest part, is finding those investments. So if we can help with that too, we want to point you in the right direction. So
it's a relationship thing, right? Ultimately you have to demonstrate. If you're a founder, you have to demonstrate that you can create and sustain a relationship, because you will have to have a long-term relationship with your funders. So
for sure. So,
absolutely.
Well, good.
Great. Daniel, do you have any last thoughts you want to leave?
There's probably some other coverages we didn't hit on, which is totally okay. But,
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing I want people to take away from this is just like we talked about in the beginning, insurance is more than just a line item on your budget. Look at that person as a strategic partner for you, somebody that can help you facilitate, not just your insurance, but contracts and connections and a long list of things really, if they're in the right spot. So I think that's just that's my biggest takeaway for people is to just and we get it a lot, and it's kind of ingrained in people over the years. Oh, I'm just going to find the cheapest rate. Well, I always say this: I can get you whatever price you want, but it may not be what you want. So,
What was that our parents told us? You get what you pay for.
get what you pay for, right? Exactly. So, but no, happy to. Anybody needs to reach out. Feel free to reach out. Happy to help in any way we can.
Perfect. Awesome. That's a great way to close. Folks, thank you for being here for the Smart Science event. I will have this recording available on my Thinking Cat Substack, likely in April. We'll see how the post-processing goes. And then I will also have the information about how to contact Daniel or also me if you have any other questions about both insurance and about how to manage your life science startup. Daniel, thanks again for joining us here today. We really appreciate having you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tips on navigating the life science industry.